100 gigawatts of solar power production, 60 gigawatts of wind power capacity by 2022. The government has set these very tall targets for its renewable energy push, but there may be dark clouds on the horizon. Bloomberg estimates that state utilities have held up $360 million in payment to clean energy companies. Is this going to throw a spanner in the works for Prime Minister Modi's green dream, as it were? And the bigger question, is the renewable energy business viable in the long term? Joining us to discuss this and more is Parag Sharma, Vice President at Wind Independent Power Producers Association and COO at Renew Power. Dr. Ashok Haldia joins us, Managing Director and CEO at PTC India Financial Services, and Rupa Devi Singh, former CEO at Power Exchange India, is also joining us on the show as well. I want to begin by chatting with Dr. Haldia. Like I pointed out, India, the world's largest, fourth largest, I should say, the emitter of greenhouse gases, and this after China, the United States, the European Union. And at that Paris Climate Conference in December 2015, Dr. Haldia, India has shown that commitment to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 33 to 35% by 2030. How will it do it, is my question, without relying rather heavily on renewable energy? India is targeting to install those 50 gigawatts of wind, 100 gigawatts of solar energy by 2022. But for all of those targets going up to 2030, India needs, like some experts are saying, around $2.5 trillion. Where is that kind of funding going to come from?
First, I think we need not be that pessimistic about the growth and the growth potential of the renewable energy.
Okay.
I remember way back in 2009 and 10 when the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission was launched. We were very skeptical on the viability of the solar projects. And when the government announced 175 gigawatts for the renewables and 100 gigawatts for the solar, most of us thought that's not going to be achieved, and that's an illusion. But the way the things have progressed, one sees that those might be well achievable. If you look at, by now we have achieved 7,000 megawatts in terms of the solar, and 22,000 megawatts have already been bidded. And if you look at globally, the progress in the solar power capacity has been manifold on CAGR of about 47 to 50%. That has been the track record globally over the last 5 to 7 years.
Yes.
And we are repeating that in the Indian context. The way we see the policies framework that have come at the state level, healthy competition, I would say, among the state governments, the impetus given by the government of India through the central agencies, the ministry and the central public sector undertakings.
Sure.
They have always been providing helping hands. There are certain problems, there are risks and there are issues, but then as we grow, as we develop, those risks and issues arise to come up. When we set up any project, there are bound to arise risks, there are inherent risks, there are risks which comes out of the regulations, the macro level environment.
Let me take that question on risk to Parag Sharma right now, Dr. Haldia, because India's clean energy companies over here, Parag Sharma, they haven't received payment right now, and that's the moot reason why we are having this discussion today. These companies haven't got payment for the electricity that they've generated for as many as 10 months, which is making their deficits shoot up to $360 million. Where is the problem here, as you see it?
So I think the bigger concern is not that renewables are, that we are not getting paid. I think the larger concern is that because of the payment problems at the distribution licensees end, every generator should get affected, not just the renewables. What we are pleading for is that in the order of priority of payment, why renewables are right at the bottom. This is completely against the Electricity Act, which says that renewables should be promoted. So I think the key issue is not that there is a distress in the distribution licensees and government is trying its best through Uday schemes and other schemes to improve the financial health of the distribution licensees. So we all understand that it is going to take time for distribution licensees to make payment for all the generators. Our submission on behalf of WIPA and all the wind and solar associations is that let's not keep the priority of payment for renewables at the last.
Which is a fair point to make. In your discussions, Rupa Devi Singh, with the government, and you worked closely on creating the renewable energy policy that the government is now pushing very, very aggressively at this point in time. How do you see these kind of funding hurdles that we're talking about and the non-payment issue as well when you talk about these companies? Because this is a very nascent stage right now to have this kind of problem. Teething troubles is one way of looking at it, but to be able to give shape to the industry going ahead into the future, you'll need to tackle these issues head on, don't you think?
I would agree, and I think I would, what Parag has said in terms of fairness of approach is a very, very, it's a problem which is peculiar for renewable companies to the extent that they come at the bottom of the pecking order. But I would extend it to say that here we are dealing with companies which are far more vulnerable. They are smaller, they deal with newer technology, they're dealing with policy which is far less clearer. I am not for a moment saying that the government is not doing enough in terms, and that should be the role of government. The government should be a facilitator, lay a strong vision, which they have done by putting a very, very strong vision coming right from the Prime Minister's office, saying that this is what we want to do as a nation. They have backed it up with the right policy framework. They have also backed it up with infrastructure to the extent that they brought renewables outside the state Section 11 problems and things like that.
Right.
At the same time, because renewables are the costlier power, they are at the bottom of the pecking order also in terms of dispatch.
How are we going to change that?
And that can only change over a period of time with the on one hand, the tariffs coming low.
Yes.
On the other hand, the affordability of the discoms going up. Right?
Yes.
And while the tariffs have been steadily going down over the last 8 to 10 years, the discoms haven't kept pace in increasing their cash flows.
Right.
And their affordability. And along with that, there is this, I would say, an expectation overhang in terms of putting an artificial benchmark. Mm-hmm. In terms of the price at which you want to purchase power, which has left to the over-aggression in the competitive act on the ground.
Do you agree with that, Dr. Haldia, that there is that aggression when you're talking about price expectations over here? That is largely the problem. We know of companies that are getting, like I said, they're impacted in 3 different Indian states. And if you add up what is owed to them, they make up for 40% of India's capacity that has not been paid right now. That's Renew Power, Continuum Wind Energy, there's Orange Renewable Power and CLP India. So if you can help us put this in context, the severity of this non-payment problem and how much it really hurts prospects of further credit being extended to these companies.
First, from a lender's perspective, as I've seen this problem over the last couple of years, we know the state of health of discoms. We also know the measures that the government is taking, and we also know the likelihood of the impact, the degree of impact that would have on the state of financial health of the discoms. That risk is very well known at the time the project is conceptualized, developed, and when the lender takes up for funding. So I would believe that when the project is structured, that risk ought to be factored into the project design and the financing structure. That's what we do as a lender. Knowing the track record of the discom as to how much month they take in payment, we built in enough safety margin in the cost of the project. Admittedly, it would impact the IRR of the developer, so be it, but then the risk has to be mitigated, and that's why we see the projects that we have funded. There are problems in the form of delayed payments by the discom, but then the utilities have been able to manage those problems, and we are not facing the recovery problems from the projects, renewable projects that we have assisted to any significant extent.
Let me take that to Parag Sharma. Parag Sharma, come in on this. How significant is that problem right now when it comes to getting credit with the current situation of non-payment is concerned? How difficult is it for companies like yours?
Yeah, so it depends upon the size of the renewable firm. So for example, Renew, we have 1100 megawatts of commissioned assets, and if this payment problem is happening in 100 and 200 megawatts, we can easily take it along. As far as long-term repercussions are concerned, I think right now, if while bidding we assume receivables of 2 months, if the situation keeps going on, then everybody in the market will assume in their financial model a receivables of 8 months, 9 months. And this is the situation in the states like Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan. So I think it is going to have a negative impact on the distribution licensees itself when everybody will start quoting, and specifically the renewables who are further getting delayed in payments, a higher tariff.
Do you see this problem, Rupa Devi Singh?
I think this is a problem which is endemic to the power sector. And I already made that point that here in renewable we deal with much smaller companies, a smaller balance sheet strength, right?
Right.
And
but if they are smaller companies, they are going to get larger only over a period of time, and for that the right environment needs to be created. So how are we going to do that is the moot question.
Yeah, so the question, how do we get them to be paid? The question is, can the government's intervention in the sector extend to bringing the renewable payments higher? I mean, I'm just, maybe speaking through my hat, but
Sure.
I've seen similar examples. For example, in the manufacturing sector, the SMEs, the government has repeatedly made interventions to make sure that the SMEs are paid faster. And there are tracking mechanisms, And I see this as a commercial banker. I've seen this happen, that while you can delay the invoices of other larger suppliers or larger vendors, SMEs, the ministry would actually track how soon they paid. I mean, this is an example I'm giving, and I think perhaps something like that to help along these smaller companies up their growth path could be done. And but these are, again, symptomatic reliefs. What really needs to be done is a conducive, viable, healthy environment in the SEBs, and continuing to work on that, continuing to work as a government towards making sure that the demand keeps pace with the supply, which has not happened in the conventional sector either.
That is the real problem, the demand not picking up as much as one would want. For that kind of conducive environment, Dr. Haldia, needs to be created. What more can be done to make that happen?
Firstly, in terms of the earlier point that we're talking about, the recovery of dues of the power projects, in the long term, we need to find a solution. As you said, that through the structuring, you can address the problem to some extent. But if you continue to receive payments over 9 to 12 months over a longer period, that certainly is a systemic issue and a problem. But I'm sure with the healthy competition that is going on among the states government, that situation may not arise for a long. There are states, I agree, that where this problem has become very chronic, but that's very state specific, and we should not generalize that. There are states which are paying in time, there are states which are paying in 3 to 4 months, and there are states which are paying in 4 to 6 months. What you are talking about, the incentives, I believe those incentives are twofold. One at the project level and one at the macro level, that is in the form of the regulatory certainty, that if you have a control period, if the projects are commissioned, you must sign the PPAs and you must pay the agreed tariff rates, and the revision of the tariff rates after the control period. And secondly is the infrastructure in terms of evacuation facilities, the transmissions, the delay in the transmission taking place. And on that account, if the project is not commissioned, it affects the IRR. Other issues that we face, the borrowers normally face, is the land-related issues, either the acquisition-related issues, or they are not able to get clear title, their difficulty to mortgage it to lenders, and then the financial closures becomes a difficulty.
Sure.
I would say, I would say that the states are earnest enough to come out the policies, but I believe the implementation and the infrastructural support to these projects, if that takes place with more vigor, possibly that would create a good environment. And as I said earlier, the DISCOMs are certainly what they are. The government is making constant efforts to improve them, but certainly you should not expect that they would be very healthy AAA, AA rated discoms. So we need to deal with that problem in a different way by structuring the projects and the financial. And if that require a hit in the IRR, we should be prudent enough to take in order to ensure that the liquidity in the projects doesn't suffer in the times to come.
Parag Sharma, we talked about the pricing issue and the great expectation on that count from companies like yours. Of course, we are expecting a good monsoon, and typically it's the time when renewable power generation peaks. Are these unpaid bills only going to rise now with the added power generated? Does that also extend your credit risks as well? And the kind of pricing pressure that you face with the expectation on that count, how much of that comes bearing down on you?
So the payment problems leads to delays in receivables, and that adds to a limited pressure as far as IRRs are concerned.
Sure.
I think more concern is about the backing down issues. So in the peak season, as you mentioned, nowadays it's a peak season for the wind generators, and at this period in certain states they start backing down the power because they believe that the demand is less and they are unable to unschedule conventional power along with the wind generators. So that is a more of a problem for us to maintain our target IRRs as compared to payments.
Fair point.
And
yes, absolutely. Finish the thought,
yeah,
Parag.
just to add to the example, yeah. So let's say in Rajasthan, right now, in the guise of saying that there is a grid instability and a grid emergency, multiple times backing down is happening, and a lot of wind generators are losing energy in this because of so-called congestion and so-called emergency in the grid.
Right.
So that is an area where government needs to have an immediate action point, because if the wind season passes, and this is a period where we generate 70% of our energy, and if this problem doesn't get resolved, in a year wind generators loses a lot on account of this.
Right.
And this should be immediately stopped.
Whereas we have these problems at the macro level, and there are these intrinsic problems of the industry when we speak about the here and now as well. There are lessons to be learned from the Sun Edison example as well. We'll bring all those up in just a moment. Do stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. Our focus is on India's renewable energy push. How much has been achieved, how much more needs to be covered, and which are the current issues that need to be resolved, keeping the long-term vision in mind. Parag Sharma, power retailers in India, they're already taking a hit because energy has to be sold below cost to keep it affordable. They haven't taken to solar and wind energy yet in a big way, because that means, again, extended capex outlays for which they need loans, they need subsidies. It's easier to rely on their coal-fired plants right now. Do they need more incentives, you think? What is it going to take?
So if you see, the cost of a solar power has come down to 4.34. This is a tariff which has been quoted in Rajasthan. And this tariff is even lower than gas-based plants tariff, obviously, and also lower than imported coal-based plants. And I don't know what escalation one should assume on domestic coal, but in many terms it is as competitive as cost of a even domestic coal plant if you add all the uncertainties around it. So from that point of view, on a per unit basis, renewables is almost at the grid parity.
Okay.
Now the question is to how equipped the SLDCs of the country are to integrate renewables with the rest of the power.
Right.
And that is where the challenge is, and both the regulators and SLDCs have to work together.
Sure. So to achieve grid parity is one aspect of it, Rupa Devi Singh, but that integration is very crucial in terms of that kind of infrastructure that needs to go in right now. How prepared are we to kind of take it up a few notches that it really needs to, so that this entire sector gets the required momentum?
See, the infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure of the country has been kind of struggling behind the demand, the capacity addition on the ground across the supply sources. So more particularly, let's say even if you look at thermal,
yes,
I'll speak from my experience as an exchange CEO. On any given day, we lost, the two exchanges put together lost 20% of our traded volumes due to congestion. It's unacceptable. Because we worked on essentially what had happened was that once we freed up the generation side, we allowed people to presume that, okay, you go find a good supply source for your fuel, set up a power plant there, and you'll be free to sell anywhere. Now that presumes adequate transmission infrastructure.
Sure.
And all our demand centers being in the west and our supply sources for the conventional being in the east, and for renewables again being along the coastal areas, this has remained a persistent problem, and there doesn't seem to be an immediate solution to that other than renewed focus and quick and timely delivery of the infrastructure.
Well, timely delivery of infrastructure is not happening.
It cannot be stressed enough.
Yes, of course, absolutely. This can't be overstated. Dr. Haldia, you agree with this? Because, I mean, we're talking basics over here.
Yes, because if you have a capacity and you are not able to transmit and distribute, then that's a bigger problem.
Yes.
As of now, we have a smaller capacity in the renewables, total 40,000 megawatts, and this solar around 7,000 megawatts. So maybe we are able to still accommodate and meet those challenges. But as it grows, the challenges would become bigger. But at the same time, the government is contemplating. They already have a green corridor, and the investment of about 50,000 crore is contemplated. Sure. And to my understanding, interstate corridor work is going on at a faster pace, and in many of the states, the intrastate corridor, green corridor work is also moving. So we expect that as the investment grows, that green corridor should come in place. If that's not, then certainly that would cause a major issue.
It certainly would. And Rupa Devi saying the other aspect of it is being able to sign and get those power purchase agreements going in Maharashtra. I hear the situation is quite grim because for some energy retailers, these power purchase agreements haven't been signed that generate projects. That in itself should be a huge issue, isn't it?
See, the issue again we come back to the fundamental problem with the power sector, and that is viability on the distribution side.
Yes.
Because if you do not create incremental cash flows on the distribution side, you're not going to be able to pay for the capital investments that are happening, whether in conventional or renewable. And renewables being a vulnerable, smaller, relatively, despite the 4.3 tariff quoted, mind you, it's not delivered, it's a quoted tariff, remain a vulnerable segment with a lesser voice.
There's no doubt about it. And talking about low tariffs, the world's largest renewable energy developer has gone bust. What are the biggest learnings over there from the Sun Edison example? Because here's a company that got cheap and easy credit, and then they burned that way too fast in buyouts and those build-outs over a few years. So here's a clear case where cash flows from projects, they became insufficient to cover the amount of debt it had taken on its books. We've seen that kind of thing happen with Enron in the past as well. But let's talk about Sun Edison. What are your largest takeaways from it? Let me take this to Parag Sharma.
So look, the Sun Edison problem has nothing to do with India. So in fact, all their projects in India were pretty much viable. It has more to do with what has happened to the yieldco in US and the over leveraging that they would have done. So
would you say that about their pricing as well, the aggression as well, the kind of buyouts that they've done? Because I mean, this could be the case. Like Rupa Devi Singh is pointing out, these are small companies, but they have huge aspirations, and the kind of projections that there are in terms of the growth of the industry, those are huge as well. So these companies will want to grow, and they'd want to grow very swiftly. There is enough competition over there. So in that sense, I'm asking you, what are the biggest takeaways from Sun Edison having gone bust?
Right. So if you look at the bidding in India, so it's not that one company, Sun Edison, who has quoted low. So it's big conglomerates and not a small size companies. In fact, MNCs like EDF, GDF, Enel, so you name anyone who are very experienced worldwide, they have also quoted the same tariff. So that shows that the tariff that has been quoted in India is pretty much bankable, and one can make a good IRR out of it. So in fact, you will see with time that Sun Edison, whatever sale that they're having in India, they are not going to sell their assets at losses.
Right.
So that will also prove the point that Indian assets are going to be a viable ones.
And what about tariff? Rupa Devi Singh, I want to take that final question to you because, like we're talking about Sun Edison making that big splash when they broke the 5 rupee per kilowatt barrier. We saw solar tariffs go below wind tariffs, and this has happened for the first time. It shook up the industry. How difficult is it to get the pricing strategy right where margins are realistic and projects, by and large, become that viable?
I think when overseas investors and overseas companies come into India and invest, I think they do. Usually, they have a challenge with what happens is not enough equity comes in. No project is ever funded with overseas equity brought in, right? So when you raise funds in India, they're an entirely different cost. And also, when you take in domestic partners, the project IRR expectations in India are much higher too. But to come back to Sun Edison, the problem is not so much related to these issues as with the fact that what Parag also mentioned, over leveraging in an environment where the energy commodity prices started cycling down.
Right.
And with that, their whole cash flow cycle broke with the too many investors pulling out, and then the whole thing, the house of cards, literally fell.
Yes. But of course, we are at a very nascent stage. The opportunities are huge, but to get the basics, the infrastructure in place, the agreements in place, all of that still requires a lot of work. The government needs to kind of go all guns blazing. They have policies in place, but now we have to see that implementation, that action on the ground. I want to thank all my panelists for joining us on this discussion. We will keep our focus on this subject, but for the moment, from me, Vikram, and the entire team, bye-bye.